right, everybody. Good morning, Scott. So it is 10 o'clock and I'd like to get started. So welcome everyone to the Finance Budget Committee meeting. Today is Monday, September 13th. It is 10 a.m. Randy, can you do a roll call, please?
Councilmember Donaldson?
Here.
Councilmember Shirley?
Here.
Mayor Kerr?
Here. Thank you for that. We're all here. So what I'd like to do is turn this over to our city manager, Mr. Girton, and then John, if you don't mind, if you can work with Roberto going through A, B, C, and D as you see fit.
Sure. Yeah, this will be easy for me because it's my first meeting. So a lot of this is going to be heavily on education from Roberto for your committee as well as for myself, getting us up to speed on what's been going on with budget stuff and some of the reporting and some of the policy direction that we need going forward. So Roberto is going to be taking the lion's share of this, and then I'll jump in as necessary, and you all feel free to jump in with questions, obviously. So for the first one, we'll just go ahead and turn that over to Roberto.
Okay, Mayor Kerr, members of the Budget Committee. Oh, let me share my screen so you can see what I'm talking about here. This is what we wanted to start with, a discussion of the June 30, 2021 unaudited financial statements to try and give you a flavor for the rest of the discussion that's going to take place. You didn't get this staff report because we had some technical difficulties with producing the financial statements. So right now, what I'd like to do is review with you why things are a little bit different at June versus all the other months. So you may recall the June financial reports you received back on July 27. Every month you get the report for the previous month. So in July, you got the one for June. However, June is the last month of the fiscal year. So when those get issued, their reports are not completely finished. The reason is in July and August, we're still paying bills that belong for services in the previous fiscal year. So July and August, still paying bills. And so when you get the report in July, those don't show up there. They're going to show up later. Typically, besides those, at year end, there's revenue accruals. Money that we receive, such as sales tax and gas tax, that come in July and August, they actually belong to the previous year, because that's when the money was collected. That's when people paid for it, but it takes it a couple of months to make it through the state system into the city's coffers. So there's July and August, typically there's bills from the last year, and there's also revenue coming in that belongs to last year. It is then recorded on the books. So those are year-end accruals. Month to month, you get reports on what's taken place month to month, but at the end of the year, for the financial statements, that typically takes a little bit longer. So typically then the council does not see the final year-end numbers until December or January. What we'd like to do, because that's a long time after the end of the year, we'd like to present the unaudited numbers earlier than that, so you can kind of get an idea where the city ended up with its finances. Unfortunately, the numbers are not attached. As I was reviewing the numbers, I guess I got a little too carried away. I wanted to hurry up and show you some numbers, but in going through, there are still some bills that we have not received, rather large bills. We're after the vendors to get us the bill so we can record it. It's one of my hesitancies is I've done before when I put out a number and I tell everybody, this is an estimate subject to change. And then the change happens and everybody remembers that old number. Like, hey, what happened to that number? Well, it was an estimate subject to change. What I'd like to do is, just so you know how this whole process works going forward in October, first week of October, the auditors are coming on board to finish the second part of the audit. They did one part back in June and July. There's another part that they have to come in and do in October. We're hoping to get the report issued in November. But as soon as they come in, and better yet, as soon as we get all of these numbers recorded, we'd like to present to you the unaudited numbers, just so you kind of start having an idea of what to expect for year end. We are expecting a surplus. Just how big will depend on a couple of these big ticket items that are still coming in. So I was going to try and present the numbers, but like I said, I don't want to present them if they're not quite finished. Even though they're not audited, the numbers I give you, I'd like for them to be pretty much the finished numbers. So for right now, it's just a matter of letting you know that that is the reason the June financial statements don't finish. Well, you've actually never received the June ones until the audit. We'd like to change that and start giving you numbers before the audit is finished in case the audit gets delayed for some reason. So other than showing you the numbers, any questions on getting you the June numbers, or would you rather just wait till the audit is done?
So I have a question. I have no problem waiting for the audit numbers when you have them. I would like us to be on track this year and have the audit kind of done, presented, and accepted by the council by December, or actually by year end. That would be great. But my question is, which bills are we anticipating that we haven't received yet?
Okay, so the biggest one is the city of Seaside for their fire services.
Okay.
They provide the fire services and then they invoice us. And we're missing one of their quarterly bills.
But we budgeted for that, and
Yes.
there has been no increase, so it shouldn't be a surprise. What about like DD&A? Are we up to speed? Because they have a tendency to delay billing.
That's a good point. Let me follow up with them right now. I think they are, but sometimes they've surprised us with some bills, as you mentioned, rather late. So let me make sure that they've actually gotten us all of their invoices. We'll follow up with them just to make sure. But right now, we believe we have them all.
So I'm absolutely clear. What you're suggesting is this body would have another meeting in November to review the final audit numbers. Is that correct?
Well,
Or the temporary, and then the final go to the council after our discussion.
okay, well, I'll ask John to weigh in on this, but typically when the audit has come before it goes to the council, it has been reviewed with the budget committee to just review all the numbers before it goes, so there's a clear understanding of that. We can wait for the final numbers, or we can do some preliminary numbers, but yeah, you will definitely see it before it goes to the full council to make sure that if there's any questions that we need to address in the report, that we bring those out. But there will be one more review by this group before it goes to the full council of the audit itself. And
So,
typically,
Roberta?
yep.
Right, what's the timeline on the auditors getting us those numbers, I think is what the mayor's looking for.
Well, right now, we're hoping, well, it's scheduled to come by the end of November, the report itself, so that it's ready to go to council in December.
Okay.
So we can, yeah,
So then we would meet, are we meeting before the final numbers or after the final numbers, pre-council meeting?
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to wait till we go through the rest of these items in case if there are several topics that we need to discuss, we can put it all together. Otherwise, we can just wait for the final numbers to review them with you.
Okay. So Councilman Donaldson, any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. Yeah, the key thing is the timing.
Okay, Councilperson Shirley?
No, thank you. I agree. I think having those final numbers would be good. So it seems like meeting maybe beginning of December would be good unless we need to meet sooner.
Okay, so I'd like to go out to the public. Mr. Bergholtz, do you have any comments on this item?
Comment.
Okay, so coming back to the council, if we don't have anything further on this item, can we move to item B? Okay.
So let me share this item. This is again more of an informational item. This is the monthly financial reports. You know, they've been provided in the past, always showing cash balances, year-to-date budget versus actual revenue and expenditures, checks issued, copies of the credit card statements. In the past, you would get the current years and there'd be a previous year comparison, which was actually the report from a year ago at the end of the current year reports. But that makes it hard to really compare. All you're doing is you're looking at one set of numbers here and another set of numbers down the road, a few more pages. And the report used to be citywide. The comparison was citywide, line item by line item, wages with no distinction between departments. That's because the city used to run on QuickBooks, and QuickBooks didn't allow for all the accounting that is necessary to track by department and line item. Now the city has a bill of MIP. It's a lot more robust in providing reports. And at the start, when MIP was implemented, a lot of the reports were formatted based on what was there before in QuickBooks. So there really wasn't much of an advantage because you were still getting the same data. We've started making some changes and like to consider some more changes in the reports that council gets, so as to provide you the information that you need to carry out your role as the elected officials. So what I'd like to do is let me share with you, okay, not that one. Where did it go? Let me share and explain a little bit how these reports are going now. So right now, what you've started seeing, and the thing is, when these reports came out, there was not an explanation made to the council. So that's why I wanted to see if we could talk to the budget committee first, make sure that how the information is presented is clear, or if we need to make changes to how it's presented. So this is by line item. We have the budget, the current year actual meaning July 1, 2021 through August 31, 2021. And then we have the prior year actual, which means July 1, 2020 through August 31st, 2020. And I don't know if that point is made clear or not, but that's what we're doing. We're comparing year to date, the end of August. So like in this case, you'll see we have estimated property taxes. There's no property taxes because those are not going to come in until next year. You can see how sales tax this year, much better, July and August compared to July and August last year. This is the way we started reporting. Instead of showing the reports, instead of showing you the July through August 2020 reports, 5 pages down the road, the program allows us to put them side by side. Unfortunately, that makes some of these columns a little bit smaller. So that's the revenue side. It's all there. On the expenditure side, that's what I wanted to talk a little bit more about. And I don't know if you notice, when you get these reports, there is a dividing line here. Here's the city clerk. So everything under here is the city clerk line item expenses. Again, current year versus prior year. Then we have here the audit treasurer, and then everything for that department. Before, they used to be all combined, and it distinguishes them, but not quite to the degree that I would like it to. But this is what you're getting right now when you go through the police department, all of their line items. And so when you get to the end, okay, now we have the expenses. We have, we'll probably change this. The system calls it net income. It's not really net income because we're not a business, but it shows through August, actually the city is $157,000 to the good. Revenues over expenses. For the year, we're supposed to end up at 307. And then this is the general fund. And the next page shows, let me get up here. Each fund now has its own page. Before, they were all combined. Here's the gas tax fund now. Again, the same thing. Now we have the revenues, current year, prior year, and then the expenses, current year and prior year as they were reported. And so we're carrying each fund here. This will, you will be getting the August financial report in the full council packet. but I wanted to kind of make sure that everybody understood what is in the report, because there's a lot of numbers and staff takes time to look at the numbers to make sure that they're accurate. So one of the things that we're thinking of adding is just a small staff report that I've used in other agencies, just a quick cover memo that says our cash position increased or decreased for this reason. You know, revenues came in, major items like, for instance, okay, we got some of the ARPA money, or as far as expenses, we had to pay half of the workers' comp and half of the liability, you know, in July and August. So therefore, those line items are skewed. Just things that are to highlight major items, not every single item, but major items in here, or major projects, because there's a lot of numbers here, and so that you kind of get a feel, benefit from our analysis of the numbers, how things turned out. But this is providing a lot of detail. What we're interested in providing is this report. This one is still a work in progress. In this case, instead of hitting every detail on one page, this is a general fund summary. We have the total revenues estimated of 4 million. Right now, this report's only breaking out the police revenues versus everything else, but then by department, you can see city council, city clerk, city manager. So on one page, instead of going through several pages, you can see that, okay, we have 746,000 in revenue, 588 in expenses, a surplus for the period of 157,000. And probably adding more detail to this so that it's maybe property taxes, sales tax, cannabis, and then the rest of the things that are small ticket items can be summarized. Council hasn't seen this one, so I'm curious what your thoughts are about getting a summary like this instead of all the detail, or both.
Are you ready for comments, Roberto?
Certainly am.
Okay, so why don't we start with Kim?
I like the details, to be
Okay.
honest. So, and we got sent these two files and I was a little confused because they were both named exactly the same thing. And so I was trying to figure out, you know, what the difference was. So if we can make it really clear that
Okay.
one is the summary and then one is the detailed one, because I was looking at the detailed one and I have questions about it right now with what we were sent. I would love maybe a staff report would help clear up some of those questions prior to receiving that. So I would certainly be in favor of having a staff report go over some of these issues. And yeah, I guess, besides kind of going down I like going down each item, and partially too, for me, it's not something that we have to maybe go down each item, obviously in a council meeting, but it does provide me information that I could go to our city manager prior to the council meeting and just review with him. So it's so much more informing. I do like the summary though of these sort of concise reports. So I don't know, can we have both?
Certainly, yeah.
Okay.
You certainly can. And that's why I want to see exactly what you want, because we need to make some adjustments to the system. And I'd like to get it so that it's providing the reports that you want. So going forward, somebody can just press this button and run it rather than have to make changes to get the data that you need.
And Roberta, I have one more question. I'm not very familiar with these at all. The percentage where you have the percent total budget remaining, is it always the percentage that's remaining? Is there another way of looking at that percentage? So for instance, for expenses and revenues, those percentages, you have to kind of look at them differently. I'm wondering is there another way of wording that, or is that just typical with budget reports? It's always percentage remaining.
So I think we can run it one of two ways. So this is what's remaining. So like in this case, all of property taxes is remaining to be collected, or it can be percentage spent, which in this case, it would be 0. And unfortunately, the column runs across revenues and expenses. So it doesn't, when you say percentage spent, it's not in revenues, you haven't spent it. The
Right.
column heading is the same. We can try and come up with something different, but in this case, It's just taking the difference and calculating how much is left. If you think it would be easier for you to view it the other way, what percent has been spent, that can also be done. Would that make it clearer for you, like in this case?
Yeah, I guess I'm like, if I have an example, yeah, yeah, in terms of revenue, if we were getting more in now, then, so like, I guess I'm looking at, let's see. So for instance, on our taxes, we like the sales tax add-on, we have more taxes that we're collecting now than we were prior to the previous year.
Mhm.
So we have a lower percentage because we're getting in more. So I see that lower percentage. And so it's like, I just have to use my mind to go, okay, that's a good thing to have a lower percentage because we're have more within our budgeted amount at this point in time, which my mind has to flip when I look at the expenses, because then if we are expending
Yeah.
more, then, and I don't want a lower percentage, right? It should be,
Yes.
yeah. So anyways, that's just the way my mind works. I just need to figure out a way to look at this. And so I didn't know, I don't want to make it change just fit me, but I just wanted to throw that out there to see if there was some way to look at it differently.
Well, we could see about maybe percentage collected and or spent. If it's easier, like, at the end of 3 months, okay, we should have X amount. Or at the end of 4 months, we should be 25% spent or collected.
Right.
It's a little easier than trying to work the math backwards. No,
Yeah.
I can see your point. But
Okay.
I want to make sure that somebody else doesn't want to do it the other
Yeah,
way.
totally. Yeah. No, I just want to throw that out there.
Okay.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Donaldson?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Kim, that's a great point. And it really, for me, whatever way it's depicted, Robert, is fine with me. It's just a matter of the way you look at it. And I'm the same way, Kim. I just got to flip my mind based on the way it's presented. But going back to the summary and the detailed sheet, I think having both is beneficial to me. I like to see the summary, and then if there's something that jumps out, go into the details to kind of see how that was, nugged out, and, taking a look at that. It is obviously good to have, but I do like the summary. And I also like the way that you've separated out, the funds, so that it's easier to track within each department, for example, and comparing the previous and the current. That's I like the way you have that depicted here. I know it adds some columns, but I like the way that is laid out. And those are my comments.
Okay. So I agree with my colleagues. I like the staff report because, I love numbers and I will dig down. I would go into more granularity, Roberto, but I think it's helpful for people that don't read a budget to get, high impact numbers in or out. So, this isn't only just for the council, it's also for the public. So I want to make sure that they can also have a quick summary, not only the summary page, but also the staff report. And I also agree, I like the granularity, so I like the summary and the larger or the more detailed report as well. In fact, what I would love to see, and this may be a little too much, but I would love to see a comparison of the last 3 or 5 years, because what I see happening is 1 year we will make a special I don't know, a compensation, right? We'll add a $50,000 onto a contract and we think at that time that it's for one time only. And then when Roberto, you and John go in to create next year's budget, you're going to use that as the end all be all, right? And then you're going to budget according to that. So for me, we had COVID years. I'm guessing we're going to have a couple of more. We've also done, and Roberto, you have done an amazing job getting us to this place. I mean, our reports are far more detailed than they had been years ago. So, and maybe a previous year's thing could be for the finance committee, for us to compare as we look at audits and mid-year budgets and next year's budget, to help us just have a little more understanding, because those numbers will trigger something in my mind that we need to remember that we added 50K here for a one-time thing, but we'll lose those. Other than that, I think, again, Roberto, thank you for, pulling out all by department and, all that stuff. I think it's really valuable, and it's moved us into a very different financial viewpoint. So thank you. So I'd like to go out. Mr. Burkholz, any comments on this item?
No, I'll just be observing today. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So back to the council. Roberto and John, do you need anything from us? It seems like there was consensus.
Yeah,
So if
no, I think it's good. I think to your point, this is the venue to get into that kind of granularity and vet all of the details before we go to the council, so we don't take up so much time at the council doing that, so that they have confidence that everything's being vetted here. So I like that.
Okay, so if I may just add then, so typically the month-to-month reports are pretty much only to this level, because you're just looking at how are we doing this year. Comparison to budget usually is what most agencies are looking at. The 3-5 year comparison, we can definitely do that as part of the budget. I mean, before the budget's prepared, so and if you want, we can probably do that, I don't know, every 6 months or once a quarter. Probably not on every single month. It just takes a little bit longer to prepare that, but it's, as long as the data is there, it can be generated. Because I can see the benefit of both, but no, typically in doing the budget, we do get more history, so you can kind of see, and we can make that part of the budget document going forward if you want, rather than just a prior year comparison. We can add more years, so as the budgets develop, you get a good feel for where the numbers have been and where they're going.
Right. You don't see what Roberto's talking about is you don't see trends month to month, really. You see trends more, protracted periods. So if we did it every 6 months, or like he's saying, during budget development, I think you get a better picture.
Well, I think it might also be helpful for mid-year. So if we timed it correctly, right, that not quite every 6 months, once every 5 months or something, but I think that would be helpful for us to be able to dig into prior to those two. So
yeah, because the mid-year will help prepare you for budget development by setting out that's when you're doing your forecasting and
right.
While you're changing for this year. Yeah.
It will also help address any concerns or increases we may have and be able to shift money around accordingly.
Right.
And previous years is, yeah.
Okay, I think we got clear direction.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see, I'm not looking at the agenda, but if I recall correctly, then the next item is the CalPERS
Right.
liability report. Okay, so this is more of an informational item, as there's going to be other financial discussions taking place. I want to make sure that everybody's clear on this is something that's been there in the past and maybe needs to be more formalized. So the city on June 29, 2019, authorized entering it into a section 115 trust to put money aside to fund the CalPERS, basically net pension obligation. The city owes CalPERS about 1.5 million that's built up over the years. And that will continue to grow. But unfortunately, that's just the way CalPERS works, the retirement system. That debt can continue to grow, and as it grows, like any other debt, you pay more interest on that debt, the more debt you have. And that's one of the things that rating agencies and the like take a look at. Well, how much debt do you have out there? What's your liabilities? So at that point, there was a staff report that was attached, and we can take a look at it. It was decided to start investing $150,000 annually in this section 115 trust, so that over 10 years, basically the 1.5 million would be funded. What the 115 trust does, though, is that 150,000 does not go to CalPERS. It stays in with the city, but it isn't a trust, cannot be spent for other things, only for retirement. The advantage is that ideally you want to just keep building it up, but if the city ever had a hardship, rather than paying CalPERS out of the general fund monies, this money could be used to pay CalPERS, also because it is retirement costs only. Other than that, it starts building up so that eventually the city will still have the 1.5 million liability, but will have 1.5 million in assets to cover that. And whenever the city wants, it could just transfer the money over to CalPERS and that would be wiped out. But the initial thought is to put it into this trust account to fund that. Now, here's what was stated. Oops, let me get this thing to work right. So this is a part of the budget document where there was decided, there's two numbers that are very similar, but come up approached very differently. The net pension obligation is an accounting calculation of 1.5 million. The PERS unfunded actuarial liability is almost the same. They're approached differently, but it's pretty close to the same numbers. This is determined by CalPERS. This is as a result of a governmental accounting standards pronouncement that calculates how this number should be done. So the plan was over 10 years, put 150,000. That would cover 1.5 million. The UAL changes year to year, as you're going to find out as we talk more on that topic. So right now, that was decided in this budget document, in 1920 budget. So as of right now, let me stop here first. So as of right now, at June 30th, 2020, this was the city's pension liability, 1.5 million, and it was funded to the tune of 310,000 in that section 115 trust. So 2 annual payments had been put aside into it. At the end of 2020, though, the surplus was only 50,000. So therefore, no additional monies were put into the trust. The trust up to now had been funded out of any operating surplus money that the city has. This year there was not enough, so it wasn't funded. But so in going forward, nothing is required right now. Excuse me, but do we want to, probably, especially as we begin considering the next year's budget, and there's also been discussion about trying to fund the liability for the federated loan. Right now, this money is going in this direction. This is the way it's said, based on that budget document. It wasn't a policy resolution or anything like that. It was just in the budget document. So the thought is that we may want to present this as a policy, incorporate into the budget the way it was set up, and it's only to be funded if there's an operating surplus. And typically, we have always brought it back to council and okay, is this still what you want to do? Because it's still council's decision before that money gets placed into the trust. Once it goes into the trust, it can't come back out other than to pay CalPERS. So that's what this is about. Let me leave it at that and answer any questions you might have. Uh,
Thanks, Roberto. Kim,
I guess my question is, why do we have to only put money into this trust if we've have a surplus of 150,000? Like we have a surplus of 50,000. Can that automatically just go into the trust? Is I guess my first question. And then I guess my second question is this something that we just want to automatically budget so that, you know, it's always funded? If we know that this is a liability that we will have, it seems as though that should be something we budget for.
All good points, and all can be done that way. It can be incorporated into the budget. It was just, like I said, it was just a statement in the budget document because the money was there. The rest of the money was used to create the economic uncertainty fund to have money. I forget what the percentage is of the operating budget to set aside. There is money right now. I mean, the city could, in theory, move more money over out of the other economic uncertainty fund. This is the way this one is. So those points that you mentioned could certainly be addressed. Staff would recommend that they be addressed as part of a bigger discussion on the city's total liabilities and what do we do with the surpluses that we have. Other councils decided to do one thing. It's your turn, so we can take a look at it and see.
So from my perspective, being new here and not having had time to get into the budget and into the details, I'd like to keep some flexibility in the decisions that we make, because this is a long-term funding solution for a long-term potential liability. So it's a nice to have. It's not really a need to have at this moment. And we're going through some rather unprecedented times, and I prefer to preserve flexibility in how we use the money that we have available to us. So I'd like more time to work with Roberto to dig into the details of the budget, and then next year, as we start moving forward to planning next year's budget and developing budget policies as we move forward, then these are the bigger types of topics that we can discuss at that time.
great.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, I like the total liability perspective, and, you know, I guess to kind of build on John's point is that, you know, when we take a look at all of our liabilities, I don't want to be, you know, bogged down by us requiring to fund a certain, you know, account or pay a certain liability. I think we need the flexibility on it. That's why that total perspective of what liabilities we have out there, we look at our surplus, and then we take a look at where we want to put it without any obligations to one or the other. Because there are factors included in that, like interest rates. So for example, on the 1.5, Roberto, what kind of interest are we paying on that? And then, you know, you can then compare that to what kind of interest are we going to get on any type of trust fund? Because if our debt interest is greater than the interest we have on that trust fund, I mean, it makes no sense for it to just sit there.
Roberto, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, there is an interest rate that CalPERS charges on these unfunded monies. I'd have to look and see exactly what rate they're using right now, because it changes over time. And the nice thing is that having it in the 115 trust, there is a much larger return than you can get at the bank right now, because this is not, right now the city's investing in the moderately conservative fund, which actually is doing pretty good. I think somewhere around 5%. All things considered, that's better than the city's doing on its money, but it's a separate type of investment subject to market risks. It's invested for the long term. But yeah, we can certainly come back to and address all of those. How much is each of those liabilities costing in the way of interest rates? And how much are we getting on some of these monies? Because I don't have the number off the top of my head, but we can certainly come back with that. Be a good consideration.
Yeah, so my concern is because we have considerations on not only this debt that we have, but others that are out there, I would hate to obligate certain monies that we would have in surplus to one specific thing. And having that view of the overall liabilities and being able to direct money into or towards each is good flexibility to have. Those are my comments.
So I generally agree with my colleagues. I'm really glad you mentioned the moderately conservative because I was wondering about that. This came about at a time when we were flush. And we were looking at how to address the different issues that we have. I like this as a guideline. I think in years when we have more, I think it's important for us to remember this. And it is a long term and it's only going to grow. So I agree that I don't want it in stone right now, but I do want it as a guiding principle. You know, and that for us to have been able to do 150 for 10 years and we're, you know, caught up would be amazing for any city, let alone ours. But we do have other things that we also need to be looking at and taking care of. So I agree. Let's not make it policy, but in some way, we all keep this in mind as a guiding principle as we move forward.
Okay.
So, Mr. Burkholz, I have to go out and ask you every time.
No comment.
Okay. Kim.
Just a quick question. So then at the end of a budget year, are we always going to just have that be a conversation about what we do with the surplus? Because I think, I do think all your points are great. And we do need to sort of lay out our options for what that surplus money should go to and then make an educated decision on that at the end.
Yeah, so.
It does come to the council for consideration. I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I was just gonna ask if it was all right for me to add something there. So probably what I'll be recommending as we go forward for next year will be that we develop a set of principles for how we use any year-end fund balance, and we'll have a whole list of options, and you may choose to prioritize those however you want to do it, but that way we have several different things that we're looking at for the future, and then the council can give us direction on which way to go with any surplus.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Got any last minute before we move on? Okay. Roberto, D.
Okay, so this is the meat of the discussion today, but if you don't mind, let me take a quick 1 minute break so I can be more comfortable because this is going to be
Yes.
a little easier discussion.
Yes, go ahead. Take your time.
Okay, let me share my screen one more time here. So you received this staff report. Actually, let me make sure I'm looking at the right one here. Yep. Okay, and I made a couple of edits, which I'll point out to you as we go through this. This is regarding the Airport Police Services Agreement. So just in the way of quick background, October 1, 2018 is when the city and the airport entered into this agreement. It goes through June 30th, 2023. Thereafter, it will automatically renew for a 5-year term unless the parties decide not to renew the agreement. So we're still in the initial phase. There's a lot more detail there, so I'm kind of summarizing. If you have questions, by all means, let me know. The service fee is basically based on 50% of the police department budget. The budget is prepared at the beginning of the year, sent to the airport, giving them an idea what to expect for this coming year. Because it is based on the budget, then at the end of the year, there's a true-up process which actually then goes and takes a look at what was actually spent, what was actually paid, is there a plus or a minus in the fee? And then that adjustment is typically taken into account in the second half of the fiscal year in January. There is also a $45,000 admin fee on top of the 50%. That's the basics of the agreement. Now, during the discussions as this agreement was being set up, staff discussed that each agency would be responsible for its unfunded actuarial liability prior to forming this agreement. The city has its liability, which we were talking about almost 1.5 million. The airport had its share. that would not, everybody would be responsible for their own. Unfortunately, that language did not make it into the written agreement. I mean, that's what was discussed, but it did not make it into the written agreement. So that when at the end of the year right now, the auditors, the city's auditors are engaged to go through and review the agreement, calculate the numbers per the agreement, come up with the number. As such, because it's not in there, they're using the entire UAL payment that the city is making. And so basically the airport has been billed for half of the city's UAL. Now, these are the numbers that we have right now. So according to the July 2020, CalPERS does an actuarial evaluation report, sends it to the city. That report is based on data as of June 30th, 2019. Based on that, the city's plan, we have two plans. One is classic safety. That's the folks that have been here a long time. The liability was about 1.2 million with an annual payment for fiscal year 21-22 of 92,000. That was the payment for this fiscal year. Well, for 21-22, this always lags behind. So in 21-22, this current fiscal year, the city's paying 92,574 for the UAL based on data from 2019. Of that 92,000, 90,259 is UAL prior to this agreement. When I say prior, I'm using June 30th, 2018, because that's a clear dividing line. Even though the agreement took place on October 1, all the CalPERS numbers, the city's numbers are as of June 30th. So as of June 30th, 2018, 90,000 of that UAL belongs to the city only, but the airport has been billed for the entire amount has been included in the airport's bill. And then there's another plan, it's called PEPRA, which was when there was a change in the law and all new hires come under this new plan. So it's a newer plan. The liability on that is only 17,000. An annual payment for 21-22 is 1,732. Of that amount, 1,608 is prior to the establishment of this agreement. It's liability through June 30th, 2018. And those numbers, CalPERS makes known to us really clear. So this is the city's liability, according to CalPERS, prior to the agreement. In addition, mentioned to you here, so the airport has its own liability for the officers that it had prior to separating, prior to moving police services over to the city. So they're still paying for their liability. That's why the agreement was made, that everybody was responsible for their own. This is their liability that they're making payments on for their police officers. So since the UAL, so let me see. So the UAL through June 30th, 2018 is really clear in the actuarial evaluation reports, and I can show you that in a minute. The payments for those balances through June 30th, 2018 is easy to determine, and that could be excluded from the agreement in language if council wishes to make these changes, so that the airport is there not responsible for the city's UAL, which is basically for past services of city employees. They would only be responsible for, so the city would continue to be responsible for its share, the airport for its share, because that's real clear. So it's the allocation of the UAL after June 30th, 2018. Now that we're combined, there will continue to be some liability increases. That's a little bit more complicated. And this is a very simple explanation. There's a lot more to this, but that UAL, so basically, let me pause for a second. A long time ago, CalPERS used to have one rate. So maybe the city of Delray Oaks paid 10%, or maybe probably more like 20%. And a lot of it is because of the way the funding mechanism works. It's kind of like an insurance policy. You know, they set rates, and then at the end of the year, they take a look. Oh, you know, they thought they were going to make X amount on their investments, and they didn't. Okay, they got to make up for that now. And maybe they expected this amount to be paid out in retiree. It was more or it was less. Therefore, they have to make adjustments for that. There's adjustments that are always made after the end of the year because it's, again, an estimate for the year. That creates this UAL, the actuarially unfunded liability, because it wasn't funded, as it turned out. It wasn't funded, so it continues to grow because CalPERS basically sets the rates at the minimum required amounts rather than putting some more aside. They just calculate the minimum. So there's three reasons for the UAL to change. Assumption changes, non-investment gains and losses, and investment gains and losses. So the thought here is twofold. One is, we open up the agreement, and anything prior to June 30th, 2018 will be easily split because those numbers are there. It's going forward. What do we do with that liability that builds up? And Mr. Burkholz talked to CalPERS, to the actuaries. I talked to CalPERS, to the actuaries. And once they're combined, it's nearly impossible to figure out, okay, how much of the liability is for the officers that came from the airport or the ones hired to help at the airport versus the long-term ones. That is next to impossible to figure out. So we need to determine a way to allocate the liability going forward. And there's different ways. Some of them could be arbitrary. One thought that came to mind is that because there's these three changes, so that maybe for the assumption, the changes that happen due to the assumptions, maybe people are living longer than they expected, or they're working longer than they expected. Any of those things, those could be shared 82-18% with the city covering the 82%. That 82% is based on, I'm basing it, this is just my thought, so it's whatever council ultimately decides, but it's based on the CalPERS maturity measures, which I'll show you in a minute, which says that 82% of the city's accrued liability, as it sits right now, is on retirees. So 82% of the city's liability is for retirees. The rest of it is for active employees that are still working, and that will probably change. So these 82% of the retirees had nothing to do with the airport. They were the city's retirees. Prior to all of that, the remaining 18% then would be shared with the airport for any changes in the assumption changes. And the assumption changes for PEPRA employees, the classic are the ones that have been here a long time. PEPRA are the newer ones. In that case, that could be shared. Okay, when I say 82-18, let me clarify that. So 82% the city absorbs, the city pays for it. The other 18% then gets split 50-50 between the airport and the city, because those officers are now working, helping with the airport and the city. For PEPRA, it's a little bit different because it's a newer plan. It's a 38-62. The city would pay for the first, well, the 38% of it is strictly the city's based on the retiree. The other percent would be split 50-50. The 62% would then be split 50-50 between the city and the airport. And again, it's based on what percentage of the liability comes from retirees. But we'd have to have a more of a discussion with the airport. That's for the assumption changes. The non-investment gains and losses, I would say let's split them basically using the same formula. The gains and losses, let's split those 50-50 because that's based on the market. The city has an X amount invested in PERS, and then if the market is good, there's gains. If it's not good, there's losses, and those have to be absorbed into this. Then, so if the city was to do this, then we're saying there's two other things that were kind of left out in the agreement that should probably be addressed. One of them, well, before I get to those, is this part up on top somewhat reasonably clear? I can show you some worksheet numbers and other CalPERS stuff to make that clearer.
Roberto, can we stop right now and do a quick
Sure.
question, see if anybody has questions? So I do, is there a reason why you're basing these numbers off of June 2019 instead of June 2018, which would be, in my mind, a more logical, because we go into the agreement in October 2018?
Yeah, no, that was an oversight on my part. When I was working with this, I was looking at lots of different dates, and the numbers I had in front of me were 2019.
Okay.
But it can certainly be, we would probably narrow it down to the June 30th, 2018 numbers. Using those.
It seems to me that if we're going in to make some pretty significant changes, I would like to see the numbers tied together a little better from a timing perspective. Just to make sure the numbers may end up being the same, but I think it would be good to keep it a little more aligned, if possible.
No, it certainly is.
Okay.
And so let me maybe right here, let me bring up. See, so this is, let me make this is the CalPERS actuarial valuation report. Just to give you, there's a whole bunch of data behind all of this. I'm
Sure.
trying to keep it simple. In July 2020, they issued this report.
Okay.
Based on data as of June 30th, 2019. So let me just use that for right now. And that data is used to set up the city's rates
Mhm.
for this next year. So for 21-22, this year, we're paying this much for the regular contributions, and then 92,574 is the UAL that they want. Okay, that 92,574 is made up of these numbers here. Let me get to it here. Oh, okay. So this 92,574 is what CalPERS wants for fiscal year 21-22. And as you can tell, that is covering items going back to 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016. Each year, there is assumption changes, not always assumption changes, but some investment gains and losses, non-investment gains and losses. And while the liability, this is the balance is here, they're only expecting a certain amount to be paid, so that a long time ago, when there was a change, the cities were hit with that change the next year. All of a sudden, wow, you had to come up with a huge number, or there was a huge surplus, and it was thought that the system was fully funded until the market changed, and then it wasn't fully funded anymore. So using this makes it real clear, where the liabilities are, what number belongs to everybody. And so here at June 30th, 2018 is where we were saying that that's everything from here on up is the cities. And then the 19 going forward, any changes in the UAL, there's a little bit of non-investment gains and losses and some investment gains and losses, of which they want, $2,300. That would be, this is what will be split with the airport. The city would be responsible for the majority of this amount. And the reason we want to kind of keep track of this going forward is because at June 30th, 21, the expected balance was 1.1 million in the UAL for the city. And this will build up, as you can tell over the years, it goes up and it goes down. So as the city continues to provide police services to the airport, this is also going into the future, going to go up and go down. But we'd like for everybody to kind of be responsible for their share going forward. And it's that fair share going forward that's the complicated part. But again, it's a small part, as you can tell at this point, it's a small part of the total amount. The
So-
majority of the UAL is from the past.
So are you stating that the numbers, the 82% is based off of numbers from June 18th or 2018?
So that one, that's a different, these are fixed dollar amounts from CalPERS for the existing UAL. The
Okay,
existing UAL, it's right there. We know how they should be broken out. It's just going forward. How do we pay for the liability that comes up in this year and next year? And so for that, let me see, where is it? I'm saying, let's use this, use what's called maturity measures. In this case, the liability that it sits on the books, 3.5 is for retirees. The
Okay.
total liability is 4.3. So therefore 82%, well, actually over here in 2018, 81% of the liability was for retirees. So if we go back to using, we're gonna use June 30th, 2018, then okay, we would use 81% because that was the liability for this retirees back in 2018.
that makes more sense to me. I
So
mean, it's
that's-
not that big of a difference, but in my mind, it's a cleaner number from which to move forward.
Yeah,
Okay,
and so therefore we're saying this would be a way to split it going forward. The past, definitely, they have their number, the city has its number. There's no question what those numbers are. It's just that they were not included in the agreement. We'd have to open up the agreement and exclude those and then put some language on how to cover these items going forward.
and if I'm understanding you correctly, the airport is currently paying 50%.
Yeah. of
Okay.
what the city has paid, yep.
So, okay. So, Scott, any questions?
Okay, realizing, Roberto, that the percentages you have is really a snapshot in time, because those percentages are gonna change as more people retire and others pass away, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so with the 82%, then how long do we stick with that? You know, you can't look at it as the numbers fluctuate. Do we have a time frame that we'll be able to look at it and adjust those numbers based on those realities?
Well, that would be part of the discussion. This is where it's, man, that's a good point, but how do I put this? As of June 30th, 2018, that was 81% of the retirees. 81% of the liability was the retirees. So where Tim and I have been going back and forth is on going forward. Right now the city has say roughly 1.5 million in liability. The airport has its share. We're each making payments. So now going forward, it's another plan. Now we're all combined, but combined, it's still part of the city's plan. And it's hard to break those out. The liability, the big liability that sits on the books right now is for the city's retirees. As time goes by, there will be more retirees that technically will be city retirees, but they provided services to the airport. So I'm not sure if we were to say, okay, as of this point, we use 81%. As things change, then we
Go down.
Yeah, that's a tough one that we will have to kind of discuss and come up with something between us and the airport. Maybe get somebody else that can kind of, I don't know about getting an actuary, because CalPERS already told us that they can't break it out. It's up to us to figure out a way to divide that liability going forward, because there will be a liability going forward.
It could be done by a percentage, right? We start off at 81% and each year our number goes down. I don't know, I'm just throwing numbers out, 5% until we get to 50% or something like that. I mean, obviously this is much more complicated than that, but I just wanted to throw out, if we're going in to make some potential changes to the contract, it seems like we want to make sure that both we and the airport are hitting as fair a number as possible.
Yeah, that's the main impetus, is it should be fair to all parties concerned, but it's gonna get to that part where it's, 81, 82, 75, 50, how do we address that? And it's just gonna take some discussions, but at this point, we just wanted to make sure that if council can provide direction that, yes, let's open it up, divide the UAL at June 30th, and let's come up with a mechanism that is fair going forward, and we'll have to kind of figure out some rationale on what the percentage allocation would be, other than 100% to the city.
Okay. Scott, I'm sorry, were you done?
No, I just want to say, I like the approach. I mean, it absolutely makes a lot of sense. I would just like to have some sort of mechanism in there that over time, as those numbers of retirees change, that we're able to address that in a contract. And I know the difficulties involved with that, but maybe there's some sort of mechanism that we can place in there that would address that reality. Those are my comments.
Okay, Kim.
Yeah, this is definitely complicated. And I understand that we want to make it equal, so that's good. So just so I'm clear, it seems like there'll be some adjustments that are made that we clearly need to clear up the difference since they've been paying more. And then moving forward, we're trying to figure out this percentage. And it seems as though that, yeah, I mean, if we've got officers that have been working with the airport and then retire, I mean, we need to split those costs. And so, I guess it's just a matter of, looking at all the information and then just trying to come up with something that's fair. I mean, right now, what you've presented seems pretty logical. So, but it seems like obviously every year that would have to be reevaluated as we move forward. So, yeah, I don't have much more to add. Thanks.
Roberto, I'd like to go out, and Mr. Burkholz, any comments?
No comments or questions. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So Roberto, let's move on.
Okay.
And John, do you have anything you would like to add, or?
No, I don't think so. I think, it's good that we're moving in a direction of trying to figure out what the fair share is for us and for the airport, so that we're all paying our fair share and not covering each other's costs.
Right.
So that's just complicated.
Yeah. Another option would be to simply wait until June 2023. It buys us a little time for the next contract, but that's
Yeah,
just
that is
another option.
Yeah, that is an option. I'd like to sit down with Mike and Tim and Roberto and talk about this and see if we can come up with something sooner, but
Okay.
there is the option to wait too.
Okay. Roberto.
Okay, so continuing on the thought of trying to make this fair to all parties concerned, and I keep saying fair or fair share rather than equal, because it's not necessarily a matter of being equal. It's a matter of being fair to both sides. So one thing is to be fair regarding the UAL that's going forward. But we're thinking if we're doing that, then there's a couple other things that are been left out of the agreement that maybe we want to address too, because it's a similar concept. The accrued vacation liability. There is some language in the agreement to address that, but what we're talking about is, everybody came over on June 30th, 2018. And so in 3 years, 5 years, people are building up vacation, and the way it's accounted for on the city's books, it's just sitting there until the people actually cash it out. So if somebody comes in with maybe 100 hours, and by the time they retire, they've got 300 hours, all of a sudden there's that liability. And if it happens, they get paid out. It's part of the operating cost. But what we're talking about is whoever's left, we don't want anybody left holding the bag at the end of this. If for some reason the airport decides, okay, we're done, we're ending our contract, the city still has liability for all these employees for their vacation that's sitting on the books. So the thought is to draft similar language on how the accrued vacation would work. And it's really more just in case of termination of the agreement, because year to year vacation gets paid out and that's part of the costs ongoing. But so at the end of the year, At the end of any agreement, each party is responsible for its own liability, using June 30th, 2018 as a beginning point. And then in 2021, 24, whatever the liability is, then okay, this is what it would amount to, make everybody aware that this is the increase in liability. It's not paid out. And technically the city doesn't accrue it. Just to diverge a little bit on this, because the airport is an enterprise, they run it as a business. The city is a government agency. It basically almost runs like on a cash basis for the most part. But at the end, in the audit, you'll see there's two reports. One is the governmental funds, which just takes a look at the cash in and out. And there's a government-wide, which technically does take into account the compensated absences. But it's a matter of which report do we use. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But ideally, the city's always, we would prefer just to keep going the way things are and address if there should ever be a termination, how the liability, accrued vacation liability would be paid off by both parties. And likewise, then there's this other long-term liability called other post-retirement employment benefits. This is basically the retirees' health insurance. Fortunately, the city doesn't have a huge one, maybe like $100 some per retiree, and the city per month, the city only has one or two, a few retirees taking advantage of this, but it is a liability that when somebody retires and they stay on the health insurance for 15, 20 years, the city has that liability. And so the city has an X amount of liability at June 30, 2018 for these, for this benefit. For the police department, we would probably want to address that too. So upon termination, there would be a coverage for this liability in some way, shape, or form. And this one is even more convoluted than the CalPERS. So I didn't want to get into how it's all calculated. Again, it's all actuaries that are doing all this math. I don't like actuarial. I like plain old math where you can add, multiply, and have a number. This one is a little different. But again, if it's okay with you, we'd like to have discussions with the airport on how this works so that long-term liabilities are covered. That's the main concern. Day-to-day, the budget is there, all the costs are being split, but it's those long-term liabilities that are not being paid year to year that we have a way to address those, and that the airport be treated fairly for its share of the UAL. So let me see, the other thing I mentioned here is, oops, where's my report? So the impact is, this is part that you didn't have in your report. It should, as you saw, it should amount to a slight decrease in the airport police service fees. But here's, if the UAL up to 6/30/2018 then is excluded from the airport police services agreement, it would reduce the shared police services expense by $139,000 for FY 19-20 and by $78,000 for 2021, would result in reduced revenue of $69,000 and $39,000 accordingly, because they're only covering half of that. Actually, yeah, they would right now they've been charged for the full amount. They would basically get a credit back for the amount that they actually had paid, or it depends on how the agreement is worked out. But right now they are paying for the city's share. They would no longer be paying for the city's share. So therefore there would be an appropriate reduction in revenue also going forward. And it's hard to project because it changes, as you can see, year to year. One year it was 39, then 78. And CalPERS determines those amounts year to year. And they're not easy determinations. Any other direction or questions, better said?
So do you have any idea? And so you pull out a couple of things. One is, I think we always have to plan for the end of a contract at the end of the contract date. There's always other opportunities. There's always, not to say that we don't want to continue, but I think we all need to protect ourselves in whatever happens at the end. So that yes. The other thing is, you know, I need to ponder whether a credit, you know, we all signed a contract that states a certain thing. And I'm not sure I don't know, is it best to make this retroactive or create an amendment to the contract and move forward at this point? So it's complicated on a good day, let alone when you're starting to look at things in the past. So those are really just my comments at this point. Scott, anything?
Yeah, so it seems to me that the vacation piece, really the only thing we're concerned about is a termination and a cash out. The health insurance piece, Roberto, is that kind of the same situation, or is that a situation, I don't know enough about it, that every previous employee will have that healthcare insurance benefit? In other words, is that going to be for every case?
Let's see, I wish it was a simple answer. I mean, you could, I guess, basically the possibility exists that, yeah, every employee we could have that for every employee. The thing is, the employee has to select health insurance, and health insurance through CalPERS is not cheap, especially when you're paying for it out of your own pocket, out of your retirement monies. So that's why we only have like 3 retirees that actually are carrying health insurance through CalPERS from the city. So, but the actuaries calculated based on potential scenarios. So it's you know, potential people, how many, when they retire, how much will they make? How many people choose to have health insurance? It's not based on actual figures. It's an actuarial amount estimating that as of right now, what it would cost if that person lived till they died, and what those premiums would be. It's not a simple calculation.
Yeah, and that makes it difficult. Now, do they take into account, I guess, the assumption that every employee will take it, and that's what the number is based on? Or do they look at actuals like you just explained?
They don't treat it as if everybody took it, and they look at the actuals, but not really. They have their own determination that actuaries use, that historically, you know, X amount. It's not just the city, but historically X amount of retirees select health insurance, and that'll change their assumptions. They have different assumptions that they use in their reports. So it's not straightforward, but ideally, that's myself, I've never really cared much for the OPEB calculations, because to me, they seem kind of high, but then again, they're actuaries, they know more about that math than I do, especially when you look that the city only has 3 retirees at this point. But those 3 retirees could be, the city could be paying health insurance, you know, $100 a month for the next 20, 30 years. And I guess it adds up. That's the potential liability.
Right, yeah, which, you know, makes this particular piece of it more complex. But what you're saying is we would take the same approach with this in terms of percentages, like the rationale that we used previously, right?
Yeah, we would have to use probably the CalPERS rationale. And there is an actuarial report on OPEB that we can take a look at with the airport to see how many lives were there as of June 30, 2018. Again, the liability prior to that they had nothing to do with that. It's just the liability that builds up after that. But to me, that would be the best way to take a look at it. And then, of course, they'll have to look at it and see what they think too from their perspective. Because I'm sure they realize that there is going to be liability building up, and we need to find a way to account for it and share it.
Yeah, so my feedback would be, yes, that we continue to take that approach, but maybe, you know, in this particular case, put a little bit of reality into it. Maybe that would influence the percentages on there, realizing that you know, like you explained, not everybody is going to be taking that benefit, whether it's a cash out of their vacation or the health insurance. I know that makes it a little bit hard, but if there is a way that we could kind of bake that into these two pieces of it, I think that would be helpful. And then I guess my last thing is, have we even spoken to the airport about this, you know, in terms of how do they feel about this approach that we're going to take? Or is this just something that we're starting off with to approach them, or did they approach us? I guess I'm just trying to get a better understanding in terms of the partnership here.
So I have talked to Tim. We've had extensive discussions, myself from the city perspective, Tim from the airport's perspective.
So can I interrupt, Scott? Mr. Burkholz is with the airport. And that's the Tim that Roberto's speaking of.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Go
we have
ahead,
not come
Roberto.
to an agreement. Yeah, so
And John, could you offer some insight onto that?
Yeah, so I know that Jeff and Roberto initiated these conversations with the airport. I haven't been part of that yet, so I hope to be part of that soon and get this moving. I mean, right now, as you can see from the numbers, this is something that benefits the airport if we move to this direction. So I assume that they want to sit down and talk with us. It's really just, how do we come up with something that we all agree to is fair for both parties going forward for the future costs?
Anything further, Scott? Okay. Kim?
Yeah, I'm glad we're looking at this, and I would encourage you to talk to the airport and then bring it back to us. I think it would be good to get their perspective. I agree. Obviously, we need to. These things are difficult to look at, but we want to make sure that all those liabilities are covered in a fair manner. So, yeah, I really don't have anything else to add. I'm just glad we're addressing it, and I'd be interested to hear how it moves forward with the airport.
I agree. I would like, can I hear from my colleagues in regards to how they feel about a retroactive versus a forward moving conversation on this? Scott?
I guess I'm not sure I understand in terms of what you mean by retroactive. How far back are you talking about, and in what type of context?
Well, the contract began in October 2018, and there were, Roberto mentioned numbers that could be used to reimburse the airport. How do you feel about reimbursing the airport for figures based on the current contract? Or would you like the negotiation to be simply about moving forward?
I think it should be based on what's right. And, you know, if the numbers based on the number of retirees and, you know, the percentages that Roberto laid out are the right numbers, then that's what we go with regardless of time. I mean, that's what's fair.
Okay, Kim.
Yeah, I agree. I think this was a new contract for both parties, and it clearly was not perfect. And so I think it would be fair to go back and, you know, make it so that it is fair from those years that were paid previously, and then create a new contract moving forward.
Okay, so Roberto and John, there's some input for you. Okay.
okay.
And Mayor, what's your take on that?
I'm fine to do that, but I also think that we were part of a contract and everyone went into it with best intentions. And I'm concerned that it, you know, I want to see the numbers. I want to see how much we pay. I mean, you showed us the UAL, but I'd also like to take a look at the other items that you mentioned. and understand how much that is. And I'd also like to know, do we pay them or can we credit them this year? For whatever it is, you know, we decide to do. I'm not firmly on one side or the other yet. I want to see the numbers.
Yeah, and that's something that we'll bring forward to you all the next time around.
Okay.
With options and with recommendations. This was more just to get direction from you all and make sure that we're going in the right direction with this. And this is something you all wanted to pursue.
Okay.
Okay.
Roberto, are we?
That's it for now. There'll be more information to come the next go round.
Sounds like it. So, can we discuss real quickly when, so these numbers, could they come back to us when we meet in November? When we talk audit, or would you suggest, are you anticipating the finance committee meeting an additional time before that?
Well, depending on our talks with the airport, I think this is something we could bring in November. We'll shoot for that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Sorry, I don't have my agenda up.
Can I just clarify that? So we would be, the finance committee meeting would be meeting in November. We wouldn't have the official audited numbers. We talked about that, right? Because I think the audit's not going to be done until the end of November. So I didn't know if we were going to be meeting after those audited numbers were done in the beginning of December, or are we going to meet in November with the idea that we would have unaudited numbers, but yet we'd be discussing the airport contract?
Roberto, can you discuss that timing?
No, I think we'd like, if we're having a meeting, we'd like to take advantage and not have a meeting after another. We'll bring you the numbers that we have, and we will try to get it as close to the final numbers for the audit. So if we're already meeting, we'll go over the audit numbers with you. By then, the numbers should not be changing. They may just not be in final form because the auditors have to go through a couple different review processes before they sign off, but we should have the numbers.
So
Okay.
Scott and Kim, we normally do this, and Roberto will walk us through. And if there are changes done before we meet as a council. So that way we have the context, you know, prior to the final numbers. But, and Roberto, we're gonna have these ready to go by, to accept in December.
Yes.
Yay.
absolutely. Yep.
Great. Last year, we had a lot of transition.
Yep.
And so we didn't get the audit until the mid-year. And so I'm really thrilled to get us back on track. Thank you, Roberto. Okay, on that, any last comments from the council? John?
No,
Nope. Roberto, any last?
I said
All right.
Too much already. Thank you.
Well, we gave you some work today.
Yep.
So thank you for all the explanation and all of the good work trying to get us into a much better place. So thank you.
Welcome.
All right, on that, we are adjourned, and have a wonderful rest of your Monday, and we'll be in touch soon.
all right.
Thanks,
Yeah, Roberto,
everyone.
Thank
well
you.
done. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Roberto.
Okay, all right.
Thank
Bye.
you, Roberto.
You're welcome.